Hello and welcome. It is Faz Kareem with Learnit, and I'm here to present you Excel 2021 Pivot Tables, which is a pretty interesting course designed to focus on how to build pivot tables using the newest iteration of our Office products, which is Office 2021 or Office 365 subscribers, which constantly have the latest version. But on October 5th, they did release the 2021 official release. And with that comes a whole new set of features and functions and even a upgraded user interface, a refreshed user interface. Now we do have some time together, and I'm really glad you decided to watch this video. In the next hour or two, we're going to be learning about Excel pivot tables. But we're first going to spend some time focusing on data, how to actually organize data inside of spreadsheets, learning about tools, even the all-new sort function and the sort by function when we talk about custom sorting. And once we get a little bit comfortable learning about organizing and prepping data, I would like to dive into inserting pivot tables, how to use tables to do that, what to do if your data sets are not connected, how to relate them together. Maybe you have a product table and then you have a sales table and you want to find out the price of each product. Well, you have to do some functions and you have to do some prepping, some data mining there to extract the data from one table and merge it to another table. And the XLOOKUP will actually help us do that. I do want to talk about some tools like building the pivot table, naming it, how to update values within it, how to filter, how to change the number formats to currency, remove decimal places, how to set those as defaults. In this new version, we can actually set the pivot table layout that we've chosen as a default. I do want to spend some time today. We have quite a bit of time and a lot of good topics. I want to spend some time focusing on pivot charts. More and more as time evolves, I've noticed the information that we have to grasp is becoming larger. And we need these visuals to understand it quicker. So using pivot tables and pivot charts together is a powerful combination to speed up your browsing and analysis of reports. There is more. It's not just this. Once we get comfortable building pivot tables, I want to talk about the different layouts and styles that you have, the custom settings to designing the pivot table. And then at the very end, I want to talk about these very fancy features that I consider advanced features that you might want to know about when building pivot tables, something known as a calculated field. Sometimes there's certain columns that are in your data set, or that I should say are not in your data set that you need inside of your reports. Well, you can build columns using calculations. You can also build and conjoin items into groups within your fields. None of this making sense yet. You don't know what a pivot table is. It will by the time we get to this portion of the course. Now, towards the end, I would like to do a demonstration of how to add Power Pivot to Excel. It's a special add-in that comes included, but you have to turn it on. And I would like to spend some time talking about the data model, where we can load several tables into a data model and use relationships and build custom columns. Very similar to our previous topic in the last slide. Adding related data using XLOOKUP, except we'll be adding related data using custom columns inside of our data model, which is another way of doing a very fancy tool using Power Pivot, another way of prepping your data. That was a long intro, a lot of good stuff in store for us. I do want to mention, if you are enjoying these videos, there's a ton of these great videos you can watch. Go ahead and hit the like button. It won't hurt my feelings if you hit the like button and if you subscribe. If you are looking to earn certificates and watch videos without any ads, I recommend to sign up for Learnit Anytime. That's actually Learnit's dedicated online training subscription service. I'll put the link for that inside the description if you would like more information on it. Now keep in mind, even if you have any questions that you want answered by me or another instructor that you've seen a video with at our channel, don't forget to join Offsite. Offsite is a Learnit community that we've put together. It has thousands of members now, and you can actually join and ask any questions and even sign up for any free events on Wednesdays and Fridays, or office hours, we call them. Now, my last little message for everybody, as always, if you do look inside the description, you will notice that there is an exercise file for you to download. This course, and most courses here, they're hands-on, meaning throughout the video, you're going to hear me say, hey, pause the video, try this out yourself. And in order to do these pretty advanced functionalities with these data sets that I'm showing you, you will be needing that exercise file that I'll be providing inside the description of the video. I'm pretty excited. Hopefully you are too. Grab some snacks, grab a cup of coffee, depending on what time it is. And let's begin with Excel 2021 pivot tables. All right, I went ahead and opened up the workbook that's inside the description. And I'm actually on the very front of the workbook in this new refreshed user interface. And I'm looking at a particular sheet known as creating tables, which is actually a list of my employees here that I have, tracking certain things like the location they're located in, the hire dates, the pay rates. Now, what we were actually looking at here, I'm going to add a little text box. There's a little special name. It's okay if you don't remember these names, but it's known as a well-defined list. That's what we're looking at. This list is a well-defined list. And if you ever do have a well-defined list, it's a great idea to convert them to tables for extra features that we can use in analysis. What do I mean by a well-defined list? Well, my list has headers. Now these headers are unique compared to each other. Besides that, our headers and data are unique. And what I mean by that is I don't have a piece of data that matches my header. I don't have a header called AD. I don't have a header called Joe, or a header called location or building 1. The headers are unique compared to the data. Now the third property that makes this a well-defined list is the fact that this has a complete data set. I don't have any blank columns. That wouldn't make it a complete data set because I have a blank column. And it actually ruins a lot of things when you're playing around with data. Like if you were to try to highlight the data even. If you hit Control and the letter A, it won't even highlight the extra data because it thinks that the data set stops. I mean the same thing. Here, let me delete this here. And I'll do a row, I'll just hit delete on the row. It's the same thing. If I hit Control A, it's going to think that the data set stopped here. So having a complete data set is something ideal, not only for us to build this table that we're going to talk about in just a second, but just for maneuvering around the data, inserting the data, highlighting the data, things of that nature. Now it looks like I have all 3 of these properties. I'm in pretty good shape. I have all 3 of the properties to make it a well-defined list. And now, if I actually want, I can actually insert a table, which is a great starting base. Great starting base for something that we're going to learn about today. Pivot tables. Because we use the table tool to create pivot tables. So I'm going to simply grab this entire data set, and by grab I just mean put my cell address box inside of it. And inside of my insert tab here, I can actually create a table. There's an entire command group devoted to this called the tables command group. And if I want, I can use the actual on-screen button, but I can also use the keyboard shortcut. Control T. And let me hit Control T here. As long as my cell address box is inside the data, it'll pick up the surrounding data set. It's a complete data set. I'm going to hit OK here. And now that I've done this, I've created my first table, which is a great starting base for building pivot table reports, because we can summarize this data in a report. We'll get there. Let's first talk about organizing data. Now, there is something I want to point out to everybody. When you do have a table selected, or if you have your cell address box inside of the table, Excel in all versions will give you a tab. In this new version, they call it the Table Design tab. And when you click on it, it's going to show you a set of tools that you get to use to help analyze this data. So one of the most basic things, of course, that we can do is change the style of the table. I'm going to make it green to match Excel since we're talking about it. And then another very important thing that I like to do is just to name my data. Inside the properties command group, we have an area called table name. And I'm just going to give this a name. I'm going to call it T employees, for table employees. There we go. So before we start talking about what tools are provided when organizing our data into this table here, I do want you to catch up a bit. I want you to insert a table. I also want you to use the Table Design tab and just pick your favorite color from the table styles. And then afterwards, just give your table a name. Now, if you're wondering why we name these things, is because we end up using these as source data for our pivot tables, and having names for them are easy to swap data sources. Or if you want, you can navigate to the data source by using the name box in Excel. We talked about that in the Excel beginner course. The name box there has the name of all your tables, where you can hit the drop down and select it. Go ahead and pause the video, create the table, practice by giving it a color and a name, and play around your name box before coming back here. And we'll talk about 2 or 3 things that I like to do with this table before moving on and talking about how to extract additional data from data sets, and then how to sort the data, and how to learn how to use these new functions that have been released to sort data. Very interesting stuff there. We'll be playing around with tables quite a bit throughout this session, but this is just the starting introduction to them. All right. Hopefully you had a little fun playing around and inserting the table and giving it a name and changing the style. But now that we've played around and got a little familiar with the fact that this Table Design tab appears whenever you have a cell selected inside the table, I want to talk about 2 or 3 tools that you might want to know about when using it. So what's the benefits of this table? Now, one tool that I want to mention that we have available, that we also have for our reports, for our pivot tables, is something called a slicer. Inside the Table Design tab, there's a tool called Slicers, and it allows us to filter the data set much more visually than we originally would have if we used a list. I'm going to go ahead and insert a slicer to filter, let's say, my buildings in my location column. This will now give me an on-screen clickable filter option where I can filter my data set. And if I need to, I can clear the filter. And if I want, I can actually select the slicer, and a new little tab appears called Slicer. Because now that I have the slicer selected, it'll show me some tools that I can use to customize it. And something that I do with my slicers is I adjust the columns if I need to. And I can adjust the width from these handles and the height if I need to. And these slicers can be moved around and located in different areas of the spreadsheet. I'm just going to insert a few extra columns at the top of the spreadsheet to add my slicer there. So we have a nice little filter tool that we can use. Second, if I go back to my table and I get the tab again, besides that slicer, I also have something called the total row. And the total row allows me to do high-level calculations for each one of these columns. I can aggregate them. On the bottom of the data set, I can find out the average pay rate. I can find out how many employees I have. And if I want, with the combo of having a slicer and that, I can go ahead and see the different variations from building to building. So the total row is another benefit. Now the third thing that I get before I actually even build my report is the fact that this data set has a filter dropdown. Each column will automatically give me a filter dropdown that actually will show me, I'm going to click on the dropdown, an area that I can sort each column. We'll talk about sorting next. And an area to where I can actually filter each column. Now, if I don't want to use this or I want to hide this from users, I can always turn that off. But I can turn it back on because the table provides me with the filter button, we'll call it. So these are some benefits that the table provides. We will be learning about this tool inside the Table Design tab later on in the session, known as Summarize with Pivot Table, one of the most important tools there, where I can build a report out of this data. But let's still talk a little bit about organizing data. I want to spend some time focusing on how we can extract additional data from columns that already exist using some very common functions that we have access to. Go ahead and pause the video, practice these benefits before moving on, and I'll be going on to the data mining sheet next. Now, a quick topic I want to touch on is the fact that you can actually use Excel's function library to pull more data, or I should say mine more data, since I am on the data mining sheet, out of existing data. So I'm looking at another sheet here, and it's called the Books and Beyond Inc. And the payroll for a certain date. I actually used a function here, the now function, equal now. Returns the current date and time formatted as a date and time. It has to have an open and close paren, but nothing inside of it. But it'll give you the current time from your computer. That's a good one. But as you can see, I do have some columns that are blank here. And I just want to get your brain juices flowing and how I can actually fill them out using my Excel function library. I actually have the hours worked for each employee here. I can determine whether or not an employee is full-time or part-time using a set of functions. One of them is called if. I also have an employee's hire date. I can do a yearly analysis of how many employees I've hired and onboarded if I extract the year of hire. And if I want, I can conjoin things in, well, we should call them concatenate strings, and I can put the month and year together as a string. Let's start out by filling out the full-time, part-time column here. By using my function library, I'm actually going to access a function known as the if function in Excel. And once you see the name of the function you want, you can just click Tab. And the if function allows us to basically check if there is a logical test, which is something that can evaluate to true or false, a comparison of two cells, And then if that ends up being true, we can say a statement or do something. And if it ends up being false, we can say a statement or do something. And in this case, I'm going to go ahead and check if this hours worked is greater than or equal to 40. And if they so happen to be, I'm going to return the string full-time, FT. And the reason why I called it a string is because you have to put it in quotes. It's a character string, they call it. And if it ends up being false, well, that implies that they're part-time, PT. And I'm going to close my parenthesis for good practice. And instead of hitting enter, I'm going to hit control enter. That way the cell address box will remain on the same cell. And I can double click my autofill handle, that tiny little square, to complete the remainder of the columns, or the rows, I should say. I can also do a function known as year, but this time they actually require something inside the parentheses here. Unlike our now, I actually have to give it a serial number, which is a cell formatted as a date. And it will simply extract the year portion of it. And I can go ahead and use my autofill to extract all the years. If I do need to extract the month, I can always use the month function. And this ampersand is a really cool trick to concatenate text strings together. So I'm going to put month and a space. I can also add a little dash in between this space. Let's do that. And I'm going to do the year. I'm going to select the same date again. So it's going to get the month/year. And I can go ahead and use my autofill handle to get all of them there for myself. So now I have 3 additional columns that I can work with in my reporting needs. Practice these formulas. Let me go to my formulas tab and let me turn on show formulas just so you can get a little sneak peek of those formulas there, and go ahead and give these a try if you would like. Pause the video. I'll be here when you're back. We're going to talk about a very interesting topic next, sorting, and these newer ways that we can sort data sets by using functions, coming up next. So I'm over here in the workbook, and I'm on the 3rd worksheet called Custom Sorting, where I'm looking at the employee master list that's actually missing a column. So this is not a complete data set. Remember that conversation we were having on the creating tables sheet about being a complete data set? This is not. Well, we can make it one using a pretty cool feature that I'd like to showcase here, known as flash fill, which can be found in the data tab. And it's pretty quick. It has a keyboard shortcut, Control E, but essentially it reduces that situation where you have to constantly build columns out of pre-existing columns. Let me explain. I already have the first name and last name in a separate column. So if I give Excel just one single example in the full name column, and I run up to my data or data tab, however you want to prefer to pronounce it, I actually have a command group called data tools. And one of the data tools that I have access to is flash fill, which I did mention the keyboard shortcut is Control E. And once you give it one pattern and then you go to a new empty cell, you can actually trigger flash fill to do the rest for you. I'm going to use Control E as my shortcut. I know, it's magic. But go ahead and try that out. Pause the video if you would like. But I'm going to continue talking here about sorting now that we have a complete data set. Because sometimes before you want to rebuild a report out of data, you want to have it organized and sorted a certain way. Now I'm sure we all know that inside of the data tab, we have a command group known as sort and filter, which allows us to do an alphabetical sort or a larger to smaller sort using the A to Z and the Z to A option. And as long as you're inside of a column, it'll go ahead and sort all corresponding data related to that column. So notice how all the rows with it also got swapped. However, there is something I want to mention that we can do that allows us to sort based off multiple priorities. Or we can have one column first sorted, and then within that column have another column sorted, and then within that column have another column sorted, and within that column have another column sorted. Multiple levels, multiple priorities of sorting. That's actually using this big sort option. Kind of looks like a spinning casino slot machine there. The Z to A and A to Z option. And when you click on it, it'll actually give you a big old sort window that allows you to add multiple levels. Let me sort this data set based off the day off so that all the people's day off is in order. I'm going to switch the sort by full name to day off. And the cool thing about this is under order, Excel has something known as a custom list. When I click on this custom list here, it'll give me an option to choose the fully spelled out days to sort it with Sunday on top as opposed to Friday if we would have chose alphabetical. I can go ahead and add in another level. And then after it sorts that, I can have it sort the locations, the buildings, alphabetically. I can add in a third level. And if I wanted to have these sorted in a different way, don't get me wrong, for my buildings, I can always build a custom list. Maybe I want building 2 to show up first, and then building 3, and then building 1. That's just how I want it sorted. Yeah. Now when I do this, this is me building in a list. It does have to be spelled correctly. It has to match the spelling. So if I sort it with 1, 2, and 3, it'll come out in that order. If I sort it with 3, 2, and 1, it will come out in that order. Even if I sort it with 2, and then 3, and then 1 in the middle, or 1 at the end, it's just out of order. If I hit add here, I now have a sort order that I can follow by. Building 2, 3, and building 1. Here for the final sort inside of the buildings, I also want to sort the zones, or let's do actually the last names. And I'll do these 3 levels of sorting here. So it's first going to get all my Sunday people, put them together. And then it's going to do this next sort here. I'll do a different color for it. Notice how it starts with building 2, and then 3, and then 1. That's how I chose my sort order. And then the last name here as well. So remember, this takes priority. So even though there's a Bellwood here in building, what is it, building 1, building 2 and 3 take priority. So this list is kind of skewed, last name 1. Always remember, you can edit this. You can always switch the order. Maybe you wanted the last name first. You can move it up a level and then the location. And now we have our Sundays here and our last names in perfect order as well within the Sundays. But then you'll notice our buildings might be kind of skewed because it's the last priority that we cared about. Pretty interesting stuff here. This has been around for quite some time, the sort function, the sort tool, the command, but they did release a sort function that we have available now inside of Excel. I would like to spend some time talking about it. Now, what we can do here is use a particular function, and this is known as an array function, to actually sort a particular column of data. So if I want, I can do the entire data set by running a sort, and I can choose the entire data, and then I can choose something known as a sort index. That's choosing what column I want to sort by, the first, second, third, or fourth. And in my case, I'll do the fourth column to sort by the units sold and descending order, which is -1, so that I can see the most sold item at the top. When I close this parenthesis and hit enter, it will spill into the other cells, and build me an array, they call it, of the data that's newly sorted, where I can go ahead and see my region, sales rep. This is pretty cool, right? Product and units. Pretty fancy method. You can also do one column. In this example here that I had preloaded, I just did the single units column here. I highlighted only the units. But it also works with the entire array, they call it. Yeah, pretty fancy, pretty fancy. There's also a sort by function, a sort by, that they've released. And if you want, you can sort by another column in the data set. So I can highlight this entire name and age column, and I can sort it by the ages. And I can do it in descending order to have the oldest people on top. And if I close my parenthesis here, it will again bleed and spill, they call it spill, into these surrounding cells in the order we looked for. I mean, you can even do this with more than one criteria, kind of like we did with the custom sorting. What if I wanted to sort first by age and then by region? So I can do that by using the sort by, and I can highlight the entire data set. And the first one, I want to sort it by the age in a descending fashion. And then right after, it's like, all right, what else do you want to sort it by? I'm going to do it based off the region in a ascending fashion with the 1. I hit enter here. It'll go ahead and sort this for me. Starting out with ages first, going down and descending, and then ascending for the regions. So way more than just the custom sorting option that we have now. We have the sort function and the sort by function available for us to use. Go ahead and give this a try. Pause the video at any points of these little snippets that you need to so that you can see the code. Whatever one it is that you're doing, you can pause the video at any one of these snippets so that you can see the code. But of course, try to practice filling it out. Now, if you do go in your computer and you type in sort and nothing pops up, that's an indicator that either you are in Office 365 and you've yet to update, which is a very simple fix. Of course, we can always go to File, Info, and Update under Account here. Update Options under Account. Very simple to do so. Or you might not have the newest version, 2021, that will have these functions available. Yeah, so that is an option. Practice these and come back to where we're going to learn about another new function to solve a pretty big problem when merging data, known as XLOOKUP. I am in the workbook, and I'm actually on a worksheet called Merging Data XLOOKUP. And on this worksheet here, I have 3 different lists. 3 separate lists. They're separated by this blank space here. Now the first list is actually a list of products and the prices we sell our products here. I extracted it from our database. This next list is a list of all of our sales reps and the regions that they work in. And then the final list that I've extracted from our DB is a column of dates of all the sales that we've done, showing what product, the discount, and how many units we've sold. However, what if we wanted to build a pivot table and we wanted to analyze the actual revenue we brought for each product? How much we sold with the discount? What if we wanted to bring in the region? Let's start simple even. I wanted to know what region sold the most products. Well, I have each sales rep here. Am I going to have to sit there and cross-reference everybody's name one by one? And then I can add the word West. Look how long this list is. Look at that scroll bar. Look how tiny it is. It's a long list. That'll take forever to create. There's a lot of sales. Look, it keeps going and going and going. They're all the sales. So instead, I can actually use the all new XLOOKUP to merge my region. The XLOOKUP will allow me to use a lookup value from one list. This is us using we're relating something from one list to another. I want to use the lookup value from this list. And I want you to try to find it in this list. That's what they call the lookup array. This is my lookup array. And this is my lookup value. Now, if I go ahead and hit this keyboard shortcut, I can actually highlight the entire column going down. And then when I scroll back up here, it'll go ahead and have it for me. So it's a nice little shortcut. And then right after, it's going to ask for something known as a return array. It's asking us what do we want to return that matches this value. And in our case, we want to return the column that holds the regions. So for this next one, once I hit comma, my return array is going to be the regions. So it's actually only 3 things you have to fill out. A lookup value, a lookup, they call it an array, and then the final thing, they call it the return array. These 3 things, once you fill them out, will actually create a formula to extract the region correctly for each one of these sales reps. And then, of course, you can use your autofill handle to double click it and do the rest of the column. Now, keep in mind, though, it's a good idea to absolute reference these things. To hit F4 and add the dollar signs around each one of these so that way they lock in place. So as you're doing your autofill, it doesn't lose any of the values. So it puts in the region here. I have one more example, a little bit more robust than this one. I also want to see how much revenue I have. And I can use an XLOOKUP, right? Because I have the products that we've sold. And I have a list of products that I can search through. And then I can return the price. But when I do that, I want to multiply it by however many units I've sold. But I also want to multiply that by 1 minus the discount. So if it's 0.03, it'll be 97% of the price. This is actually going to give me the entire revenue. It's going to give me how many units I've sold. It's going to give me the price for 2 units with the discount applied. And then, of course, notice how I get some NAs. What did I do here that I didn't do here? I didn't absolute reference the values, the cell addresses. So that way, as I scroll, I won't lose any of the lookups. Now that I've absolute reference, they fixed it. They only get this entire column here and make it into currency values there. Cool. I could have also used the keyboard shortcut. Control, Shift, and the number 4. That would have also made it into currency values, instead of me doing it in my home tab. So pretty cool, right? I can extract data with an if function, the year, the month. I can merge data using XLOOKUP. I can sort data using sort or sort by. I can build tables for the total row, for formatting, for filtering, slicing. A lot of tools in terms of organizing data. Coming up next, though, I do actually want to build a pivot table. I have 2 data sources. One's a month of data and one's a year of data. And I want to analyze these data sources and build pivot table reports out of them to see who maybe is the top seller, the bottom seller. They're all merged and put together, everything. I've already done all the extracting and cleaned up the data. So it's just ready to go for pivots. Let's begin. Go ahead and pause the video though and practice these 2 functions. Here, let me go ahead and turn on the show formulas here for you to pause the video with the functions on the screen. Don't forget to come back. I'm going to start talking about some pivot tables. I'm inside the workbook, and I'm on a particular sheet called Data. And this sheet is actually tracking my order details from December of 2014. It's a rather large data set in the sense that it has about, I believe, yeah, there we go, 26 columns of data. That's 26 whole columns. Not too many rows. Not too many rows. It has about 68 rows there total from the top to bottom, so 65 total actual data rows. Now, what if I had an assignment here where I have to figure out some answers by browsing this data? I want to figure out, maybe I have a column called salesperson. Out of this list of salespeople, who actually brought in the most revenue in the month of December? Okay, what did they sell the most of? I mean, we can sit there and filter things. That will always work. But what if we had 10 to 15 salespeople? Are we really going to filter for 15 different salespeople and then calculate their revenue one by one? So there's Andrews. You'll have to do the same thing over and over again. This time for Ann. So it looks like Andrew still sold the most. Instead, when we're working with these tables that we have, this is a table here. I can go into it and I can see that there's a table design tab. I actually have an option to, and it says it right here, to summarize with pivot table. It's inside of the tools that I have with my table. And if I were to click summarize with pivot table, as long as my cell address box is inside of the table, it will allow me to insert a pivot table so that I can summarize this large amount of data. Let me do that. I'm going to hit summarize with pivot table. And it automatically will pop up a little window that will show me the name of the table that I used when I inserted the data. When I hit insert pivot table, I was inside of this table. And it asks me if I want to build this pivot table on a new worksheet or on a cell on an existing worksheet. I'm going to build it on a new worksheet. And later on today, we're going to learn about something called a data model, where if you have your data separated into separate lists, you can actually build a model of that data and use relationships and conjoin the columns, building custom columns in Power Pivot. Very powerful tool that we'll see a snippet of today. But for right now, our data is already put together. We have all 26 columns. I already have a table. It's called T December Sales. I've already named it. I'm going to simply hit OK to insert my pivot table. So now that I have an empty pivot table report here, there's something I want you to know before catching up. When you're inside of a pivot table report, you're going to see right now it's empty. There's no fields that I've created the report with, but there's this blank spot where the report would go. And I'm inside of it. Because of that fact, Excel has given me 2 additional tabs now. First one's called the Pivot Table Analyze. The second one's called the Design tab. And it gives me a third area called the Pivot Table Field List. Now, one of the first things that I like to do with the pivot table is I like to go to the Pivot Table Analyze tab, and I'm going to give this pivot table a name from the pivot table command group. I'm going to call it Top Seller. Because it's going to be our top seller report. Once I end up giving it a name, I'm also going to do 2 other things. So that's the first thing I want to do. When you're building a pivot table, you have to use this area on the right-hand side. This area on the right-hand side is pretty customizable now. It's going to show you all of the columns that were inside of the data in the same exact order that the columns showed up in. But there is a way that you can alphabetize this. And there's this little toolbox they released in 2016, and when I click on it, I have an A to Z sort option. Now from here, now that I've done that, I also can customize the entire field list by putting it side by side. Now I have all of my fields on one side. And I have all 4 boxes that I can use to drag and drop my field into to create a specific part of my report. So I've done 3 things here. I've named the report. That's what I called it, the top seller. I've also customized my field list to be from A to Z. That's from my toolbox. And I also switched my field list to be side by side. That was also from the toolbox. Pause the video. I want you to practice and catch up and insert a pivot table, summarize with pivot table yourself. From there, go to the Pivot Table Analyze tab and give it a name before you get started with the building of the report. And just to make your life easier when you're actually building the actual columns and rows of the report, alphabetize this list. It's 26 fields that you may not have gotten a chance to actually look at inside the raw data. You didn't have time for that maybe. So go ahead and pause the video, practice those 3 things, and come back for us to continue building this pivot table report. All right, I'm over here on this newly created sheet that we built in the last video, or the last snippet of the video, where we inserted a pivot table. Let me rename this sheet to Pivot Table 1, PT1. And now that I have this pivot table created, there's something I want to point out. if you move this cell address box outside the report area, Excel will think that you no longer want to build the report. For the time being, it will disappear and remove these areas that I'm Xing out. So those 3 things that we talked about in part 1, it will X them out and remove them essentially until you go back into the report. So always remember that if you're like, wait, I don't see anything, I can't build it, because you've moved the cell address box outside of the report. Now I've already named the pivot table, that's good. Let me build my top seller report. And in order to do that, I have to use the columns from the data set that I have. This is known as the source data, and we're using the columns from the source data, and they call them fields. They just changed the name to fields. Now, what we can do here is we can actually drag and drop these fields into 4 different boxes. And depending on what box you throw them into, it's going to build a different part of my report. So I did say I want to build a report that tracks the top seller from the month of December. So if I want, I can see a list of salespeople going down columns. I can create columns by dragging the salesperson into columns here. This will give me 8 columns, not necessarily what I wanted. Too large for me. And it also gives me a filter drop down for the column labels. But I can also get these salespeople and make them into a nice compact single column and list them down rows. Notice how this created many rows in my report. Hence the name, the rows box. And it also gives me a drop down to filter these rows. Now if I want, I can actually build a report using these as the labels. So notice how I have this option that shows the revenue. I've already seen what columns does, and I've already seen what rows does. I have an option to get the revenue, and I can drag and drop it into the values box. And when I do that, it'll end up showing me the summation of all the revenues, going based off the breakdown that I have. Salespeople. If I wanted it based off region, I could have thrown out salesperson, and I could have put in region. If I wanted to get region and throw it out, and I wanted to do it based off the categories that we're selling, maybe I want it to be very specific and I want it to track the products. Good thing this is in alphabetical order. Let's see how much quantity we're selling of each product. So I'm going to go back to my original report where I'm showing the top seller, just kind of getting our brains going here. I'm going to get salesperson and put them into rows. And I'm going to get the revenue and put them into the values box. And I do know we actually have a filter box at the top where if I wanted, I can filter based off of the field, like categories. But this is a little outdated these days. I can toss this out. Because inside of the pivot table Analyze tab, we now have something called a slicer. This will allow us to filter using the visual that we learned about in creating tables. Let me show you. I'm going to add one for salesperson here. And now I have an on-screen, let me add a column to it, clickable interface for my filtering of my report, instead of using the drop-down. Now, besides the salesperson slicer, I also have a column for order dates. Let me find that there, order date, where I can filter based off the dates of the orders. Look at how many orders we've had all throughout the month of December. But instead, I can go into the Pivot Table Analyze tab and use another form of a filter called a timeline. I'm going to add one for the order date. And now I have this on-screen filter. Let me switch it. I'm going to click on the month of December, and I'm going to go into days. And then I'm going to go and click on the timeline, and I'm going to hide the timeline level, so that way only people can browse through the days of December. That's it. I'm going to clear these filters here, so my report's looking pretty good. Pretty good. I have things are going. They're not ready yet, but they're going. I also want to actually show a visual representation of this report. So if I go into my Pivot Table Analyze tab, there is an option known as Pivot Chart. Pivot Chart. And the Pivot Chart lets me choose a visual representation of the report. Let me choose a bar chart and hit OK. So to me, when I'm building a pivot table, these are the things I'm looking for. I'm actually looking for the report. I'm also looking for a set of filtering tools. And I'm looking for a visual that I'll format in a little bit. I'm looking for these three things here when I'm building a report. Now I do want you to catch up. So I do want you to add some timelines, some slicers, and a top seller report with the visual before moving on to the next parts of this video, because there is a lot more steps that we're going to do, and I just want to make sure we're at a good pace. So pause the video, catch up to these small little steps that we've done. If you do need to see inside the pivot table, I'll click into it. You can pause here. Don't forget that these two slicers that I've added in were found inside the Pivot Table Analyze tab. And don't forget this pivot chart that I inserted was actually found inside the Pivot Table Analyze tab as well, and I used a bar chart for it. Go ahead and practice, have fun, don't forget to come back. A lot more in store for us. All right. Now that we have the pivot table built, I do want to play around with it a bit, talking about some benefits of having this report. Now, one of the most fundamental features of using a pivot table report is understanding the concept of a drill down. And that's when you actually double click one of the values columns, rows. It will actually show you the values it used to produce that answer. So if I wanted to figure out Andrew's sales, I can double click into it, and it'll end up being a new table on a separate sheet that will show me Andrew's sales. And if I browse this data, I'll see that Andrew sold a lot on the 4th of December. And I can actually track the revenue here to see that that's where they produced that $12,000 in revenue. I can do that for each one of my salespeople, even Ann. There's my Ann sales. And I'll do Jan for the final one. I won't do everybody. So drilling down a report's pretty simple. But what happens if we actually built the report and now someone's messaging you saying, hey, I have some new data that I need you to show in this report. And they have one new row of sales data. So on 12/3/14, they forgot to add that U. I'm going to add my name, Faz Kareem. I'm going to put East, made a sell. And we sold Excel. And the revenue here, we're gonna put, let's just put $1,000 here, $1,000 for the revenue. So we added in a new row. Why, or how I should say, can I have that show up in my report that I've already created? So what I can do now that I have the report created is I have the concept, instead of drilling down, I can right click. And one of the concepts of updating a report's source data is known as refresh. As long as you're inside the pivot table and you right click a cell, you will see the option to refresh the report. And when you do that, it will show you the newly added values that you've added into the report. Now, one thing I want to show you here is that inside of the summary, inside the actual data, I have currency formats. The dollar signs in the revenue column. But when I go over to my pivot table, the dollar signs do not show up. And it's not even sorted. So if I want to change the number format of the values, I can change the value field settings by clicking on it, the value field settings, and I can change it to show me the number format as currency. And I'll go ahead and lose the decimal places as well. And I'll hit OK. That looks good. And I also want to right click and sort this data so I can see it from largest to smallest. Wonderful. Notice how even my slicer has now added this new value from my report. And if I were to filter, I believe I left it on the 3rd. We're going to see that I'm added into this report now. So I've done quite a few things. I've learned about drill down by double clicking. I've learned about sorting by right clicking. And if my values box was right here, I would also learn about number format. That's also what I've covered here. I do want you to practice these things. Now I want you to practice these things, and once you're done with the practice, I want you to do one final thing. I have another data source. It's called complete data. In fact, I've named this data source T2014 sales. It's the same data, but the entire year's worth of orders. Same exact data, but the entire year's worth of orders. Have all the months. What if someone's asking you to build a report showing the year's top seller instead of just the month? You don't have to create a new report. Just like we were able to refresh the values, there's also an option inside the Pivot Table Analyze tab. And that option is to change the data source to another data source that has the same corresponding columns, but maybe additional rows. And I'm just going to change it not to T December sales, but T 2014 sales. That's what I call the other table, and I'll hit OK. Notice how my name went away. My name went away. I'm going to clear this filter here to show you that the numbers got much larger since we're tracking the entire year's worth of data. I do want you to practice drilling down, sorting, changing the number format, and swapping data sources before playing through the next video, where we will be covering some pretty advanced layout and design features for the chart and pivot table report itself. Okay, hopefully you had fun building the report, formatting it, But what I want to do here is I just want to make a copy of this report sheet so I can play around with it without messing up the original one that I have. So I'm just going to right click and choose move or copy. And I'm simply just going to create a copy of the same sheet that I have right next to it. I'm going to hit create copy and hit OK. And I'm just going to call this one PT2. That way I won't mess up the original one I had. Because I also want to see in this pivot table report what categories these salespeople are selling the most of. Like, what is Nancy selling the most of, so I can tell Jan to sell those things. So I'm going to get category and put them inside of the rows box. Great, so now it's letting me know where I can expand and collapse each salesperson. There's only 8 of them, and I can see what they've sold. I can see Jan sold beverages, candy, fruits and vegetables. Notice how I have to click each one of these individually. Inside of my Pivot Table Analyze tab, I actually have an option to hide these options here, to show and hide the buttons. You can leave them fully expanded or fully collapsed. And if you want, you can also right click and the option to expand and collapse the entire field will be available in one go. I can do a single field, or I can go and expand entire field, and that does all of them. I'm going to go back over here to a collapse entire field. So pretty powerful, pretty powerful. If I want, I can also go in here and I can sort it based off the categories. So now the categories are sorted from within the salespeople. So not only are these salespeople values sorted, but now if I go into these categories, I can see that the top selling category is beverages. For Andrew, it's jams. For Laura, it's condiments. Let's see what Nancy sold the top most of. Beverages. Looks like that's a pretty good winner. Our top 2 salespeople will be selling a lot of beverages. So when you have these reports that are more robust, like I have 2 items in rows, I have salesperson and categories. Someone might even want to break it down based off the region now. They'll throw it into columns. Now it's showing the report. I know my chart gets a little mumbo jumbo there, but it's showing a report of each region. It looks like we have a blank region. Someone forgot. It looks like Andrew forgot to fill out one of his regions for East. Which is actually pretty easy to fix. We've learned about refreshing values. So if we go to this complete data here, and we will see that Andrew, where is Andrew? Andrew. I should filter this list so I don't have to look like that. Andrew is in the East region. But it's looking like inside the regions, we have blanks. And it looks like Andrew did forget. I'm just going to put East. I'm going to fill it in for him. And I'm going to clear the filter. So now when I go back to my pivot table, I can always refresh. I got rid of my blank there. So very easy fix there. Now that we know about refreshing reports, we can target those blanks and fix them as they come along. Let me get this regions field and toss it out. I don't really want to see that right now. Cool. Now, notice how as I change this report, the chart changes as well. Everything in the chart changes itself as I change my report. Gets a little scrunched up because I have so many values into it. Let me just delete this for now. Then I'm going to go ahead and collapse this here. So when you do have a report that's a little bit more robust, you might want to consider the design of the report. If I want, I can actually get these subtotals and not show them. Here, let me expand it again. So this is a subtotal. I can actually hide those. Subtotal, do not show. Now it's just focusing on the grand total. I can show at the top, or I can show it at the bottom. This adds an extra row for each salesperson, though. If you think about it, we have 8 additional rows now. So I prefer them at the top. I can also get the grand total and turn it off entirely. And if I want, there's actually different styles of report that I can choose from. Right now, what we're looking at is the compact form. I can switch this to outline. And if I want, I can repeat the item labels. Or I can switch this to the tabular form, which is great for printing. It puts it on each a separate cell. And after each blank line, after each row, you can insert a blank line if you need to. Remove blank line. Now, once you do find these settings that you like for your report, you can actually now save them for all future reports to show up with this exact design. In order to change the default layout of your pivot tables, you have to go inside the File tab and play around with your Excel options. And under the Data option, you can change this to the default layout of pivot tables. And when you choose Edit Default Layout, you can actually import a layout from a pre-existing pivot table. So I can go in here and choose Import. And it changes the report layouts to all the settings that I want based off this report that I was in when I chose Import. I can also hit Reset to Excel Default if I want to go back to the original, which I am going to do before leaving the screen, and hit OK. So designing this report is actually pretty simple to do. I'm going to go back and switch this to the compact form there. Notice how it separated the categories in the salesperson when I went to outline. So designing the report is one aspect of customization that we have. We can even go a little crazy here and pick a different color. We'll do green for Excel. But you also have an option. I'm going to go back to PT1 to design the chart. When I select this chart here, I can get these field options and I can hide them. I can get this plus sign from the chart and remove the title. I can remove the legend. I can get this axis and delete it. I can get this paintbrush here and change the color of my chart. I can click on the grid lines and hit delete on my keyboard. Look how quick that was. I can customize it and add certain data labels. And as I'm filtering this, my chart will also filter itself as well. I don't like how the number was touching the bar, so I just edited the plot area. So whether it's designing a report using the Design tab, or it's customizing a chart using the plus sign, the paintbrush, both are fairly simple to do with your pivot tables. Notice how even, look, the labels are backwards. Nancy's on bottom here. I can click on the axis and I can format it with a right click. Even here, I'll have an option to reverse the categories to put them in the same order as my report. I can also format the bar, the data series they call it. I can right click and I can format the data series and make the gap between them smaller or bigger to make the bars a little bit bigger there. I have been talking for quite a bit. I've done quite a bit. I do want you to catch up by designing your reports, whether it's going to PT2 that we've created in the very beginning and going to the Design tab of it, building the report and designing it a little bit differently. And going back to PT1 and playing around with the chart, go ahead and practice these small little formatting features before we move on and talk about a pretty interesting topic with pivot tables. We're going to learn about a special add-in known as Power Pivot that allows us to merge multiple lists, I should call them tables, and build relationships amongst them and build a pivot table report out of that multiple tables that we have by building a data model. Very powerful tool. Stick around for it, but first practice the basics of this pivot table we just created. All right, welcome back. I'm over here on a worksheet called PT1 that we created in an earlier video. I believe pivot table part 1. And this is actually tracking the top seller for the entire year at this point, now that we've swapped the data source. Now with PT1 here, I'm actually looking at the data itself. I'm going to close this format shape, and I'm noticing something. I don't have a field that shows me my bonus. Each one of these salespeople are supposed to get 5% of their sales as a bonus, and I'm supposed to track that metric. Now, unfortunately for me, though, my data set doesn't have a field called bonus that just gets the revenue and multiplies it by 5%. Lucky for us, though, inside the Pivot Table Analyze tab, we have a command group known as Calculations. When you go to Calculations, there's an option to build a new field inside of your pivot table report. Now I can do this by building, I'm going to call it bonus. I'm going to do this by building a field using pre-existing columns and inserting them, like maybe my revenue field here, multiplied by 5%. When I hit add, it will add in, look at that, a bonus field into my report that I will later see inside. And now it will show up in the report itself as well as the visual. I can also do the same thing for the items within a field. Trying to just give you an idea of what I mean by item. So my field is salesperson. The items are Nancy, Ann, Andrew, Mariah, Laura, Michael, Robert, Jan. If I would have chose products, my items would have been beard, almonds, dried nuts, all these different products that I'm selling. Those are my items. Now what I want to do is I want to get this field and I want to get the items and I want to group them. I want this to be team 1 and I want this to be team 2. So I essentially want to create new items out of pre-existing items. That is known as a calculated item. And as long as you're on an actual item inside the report, the option for calculated item will be available for you. And then from here I can build, I'll call this one team 1, an item that will track all the sales of the first 4 people. And when I hit add here, I just did the first 4 on the list. It'll add team 1. Let me add one more. I'll hit OK. There's my team 1. I'm going to add one more for team 2. And I'll do the last 4 here. Oop, I forgot the plus sign there. Gotta make sense logically. And I'll hit add. So I've added in 2 items now, which doubled up my totals. I've doubled up my totals and my bonuses, but I can always go to this option here, and I can always hide everything besides team 1 and team 2 by filtering them off here. So this is a calculated item. This is something that some people go with. Let me delete this really quick, just to give you an idea, because there's also another route you could have taken. I'm going to go calculated item. I'm going to choose the drop down for team 1 and choose delete. I'm going to choose the drop down for team 2 and choose delete and hit OK. So let's say we didn't have that. Instead, some people will just grab the first 4 and right click and group it. And then this one, they'll just call the top name from the formula bar, team 1. And then these 4 people will also be grouped into team 2. This is another way of, very similar in essence, but we're not building items. I can now expand and collapse amongst the teams while still seeing the individuals, as opposed to the other version wouldn't let me see the individuals there. So we have both ways, calculated items or fields, or what they call grouping, but both work very well for this task of building new fields, whether it's a bonus field or adding in new items. I do want you to practice this, and then up next we'll be talking about Power Pivot to build the data model, but this was something good to get in, and notice how it even showed up in our chart as well, team 1 and team 2 separation. Go ahead and give this a try, pause the video, practice building some calculated items and fields, and we come back, we'll learn about, for the most part, the final topic of the day, Power Pivot. All right. I'm actually on the final sheet in the workbook. At the very end of it, there's a sheet known as Power Pivot. And it's a very similar sheet. It's the same exact sheet as merging data with XLOOKUP that we did in a previous example. But I want to start talking about a special add-in that you can turn on in Excel to build data models. Now, in order to actually use Power Pivot, you actually got to spend some time, just once, turning on the add-in. And it'll show up at the top as a special tab called Power Pivot. Now, if I go over to my File tab and I choose to go to my options, I will get a setting to customize the ribbon. I could have very well also just right-clicked any one of the ribbons tabs to customize the ribbon, and it would take me back to the same area. Now from here, I have an area called add-ins a little bit lower than that, to where I can choose to add in a special ribbon to my interface. When I go to COM add-ins under Manage and I hit Go, I'll get the opportunity to turn on Power Pivot for Excel and hit OK. At that point in time, I will have Power Pivot at the top of my interface for all future Excel files that I use on this device. So before getting started, go ahead and pause the video, see if you can go to your File tab and go down to your options, and take a look at your add-ins to add in that COM add-in for Power Pivot. Some machines will require you to turn Excel on and off essentially to close it and open it. If you notice that it's not popping up there, but it should just pop up right away. If not, just try restarting the software and it should be good to go. Go ahead and pause the video and come right back once you have Power Pivot enabled. Now when using the Power Pivot tab, it allows us to add these 3 lists into something called a data model. Now in order to add these 3 lists, they have to first be converted into tables. And it's recommended to give these tables names so that they show up with names in the Power Pivot window. So the first one, I'm going to go in here and hit Control T, and I'm going to go to my Table Design tab, and I'm going to call this T Products. For this next one here, I'm going to hit Control T, hit OK, and I'm going to go into the Table Design tab and call this one T Regions for Table Regions, and on this last one, I'm going to hit Control T, hit OK, and I'm going to call this one T Sales. Now I have the opportunity to add all 3 of these tables to my data model by clicking into the products table and hitting Add to Data Model. It'll pop up a new window, I'll get this next one here, and I'll add it to the data model again. There's my second one. I have T products and T regions so far. Let me split screen my device. All right, my final one here, the sales, I'll hit add to data model. Great, now I have all the T products, the T regions, and the T sales in the Power Pivot for Excel window. I'm gonna go to full screen here. Now, something that you have to do with these tables is we have to establish relationships amongst them. I mean, if you think about it, when we were doing our XLOOKUP, we did that. When we were doing the XLOOKUP in our previous examples, let me turn off show formulas. There was a relation that I did, a related function. There's like, I got the salesperson from this list and I related it to the one here with the lookup and the lookup value in the lookup array. That way I can match the regions like I did here. So the relationship was based off the sales reps, where this one was based off the products. These are related based off these two columns. They're one of the same. An aspen here lines up with an aspen that we would find here, or a doublers that we would find there. This doubler is the exact same as the doubler here. And this costs $79.95. So the Power Pivot window is giving us an opportunity, come back here, to actually view the data inside the window. It doesn't let me edit the cells. I can't edit anything besides the headers at this point. I can go and browse through each one of these data sets. Luckily, I've named them. The names show up on the bottom, just like worksheets, but they're table names. But inside the Home tab of Power Pivot, I have something known as Diagram View, where it's going to switch it from the Data View, and it's going to go into a Diagram View. You can make these bigger. Most of the time you have to, because you have so many columns. And essentially, we have to establish relationships amongst these tables so that when we use formulas, they know what columns correspond to each other. Like sales rep to sales rep. I can drag and connect the two, giving me a one-to-many association. There's one sales rep, and there's many occurrences of the sales reps. I want you to associate the one sales rep and the region associated to it to this sales rep from the sales table. I also am going to get products and assign it to the product, so that way the prices from this table will be associated to the sales of each product from this table. Once you're done with that, you've done a good job of setting up the data model for you to start building custom columns. I do want to pause the video, and I want to give you all a chance, now that we've turned on Power Pivot, and I want you to give you all a chance to actually add all three of these to the data model. And once you've added it to the data model, I also want you to just spend a good little moment browsing the data model's sheets, and then going over to the diagram view and connecting the sales rep to sales rep 1 and products to product, so that we can build some custom columns coming up next. So now that I'm in Power Pivot and I've already established my relationships, I can actually use a set of functions. They're known as DAX functions, data analysis expressions. There's about 200 of them. There's a whole documentation on them that you can browse online that we can use to manipulate columns at a time, especially columns that have relationships. Now let me add in one column here into the sales table, because there's a function known as related that I can use here in this window. And once I open up the related function, it will show me all the columns that I can associate to this data set based off the relationships that I've established. So I'm going to show and bring in the regions. And when I hit enter here, it designs a calculated column that I can rename regions. I can also add an additional column here. I'm going to do another related, And I will do the price of each product, but I will multiply it with the column of units, and I will multiply that with 1 minus the discount price to give me the actual price of the product that they paid. So if it was 0.03 minus 1, that's 0.97. So it'll be 97% of the price. If I hit enter here, it will build me that calculated column here. And I'm just going to call that revenue. And now what I can do is now that I have my data model built, I can always go to the option from the Home tab and design a pivot table in Excel using this data as the model. Let me build one on a new worksheet here and hit OK. So it actually shows me when I'm using Power Pivot, it shows me all of the tables, but it categorizes all the ones that have associations and relationships together by not adding that little line in between them. These are all separate tables, have no relationships amongst each other. I can build pivot tables with it, but they won't work with multiple fields from one table and another because there's no relationships amongst these ones. But these ones here, there are relationships. I can grab a product and put the list of single products here. And I can also go to my sales here and I can figure out the revenue that I have for each one of the products that I've sold. And this pivot table can be built with 2 different tables of data. Why? Because Excel knows, based off the data model, that this product actually has an associated revenue that we've used with the related function. Much different than us actually using, let me throw this out, product. Boom, within the same table here. This was built. This wasn't originally there, whereas this one we added in. I also have regions here. Look, I can actually drag and drop. Let me throw this out. I can get sales rep from one area, and I can show the regions from another table as well. And it pulls up those regions for myself. So pretty interesting. Here I can count how many sales we had for each region. Pretty powerful tool. I can switch it to active here just so I can focus on the tables that I'm currently working with. And it allows me to be much more flexible with my raw data when working with pivot tables. Go ahead and try this out. Try closing the data model. If you ever need to open it again, you can hit add to data model, or you can hit manage. I apologize. It'll take you back to the window. But do practice designing a pivot table using this data set. Now keep in mind, there are a lot of things Power Pivot can do, like sort certain columns based off another column. We learned about the sort by earlier. We can also sort things from largest to smallest. But there are other functions, array functions, that we've covered that do similar things in nature. Practice this, load up a very simple pivot table, and we come back, we'll talk about what we've covered in this past hour and a half or so. Congratulations. You have completed Excel 2021 pivot tables. In this course, we spent a good chunk of the course learning about organizing data. Wide variety of ways. We learned about tables, sorting, the new sort function, and the sort by function. And then we dabbled into merging data using the XLOOKUP function that was released. From there, we started learning about pivot tables and all the enhancements, including alphabetizing your field list and moving it side by side. We started dabbling in specific features of the pivot table, such as drill down, sorting, grouping, and we even built a pivot chart and learned a little bit about formatting it. From there, we learned about the design tab of our pivot table and how we can customize the layouts and show certain things like subtotals and grand totals. Towards the end, we started dabbling in advanced features like calculated fields. Those are columns that we have that we can create with existing columns, and items, which are the actual values inside of the fields that you can conjoin together, multiply together, and use in calculations. Towards the end, we've learned that not all data is perfect, and that there are special advanced tools that you can add in, such as Power Pivot, that allow you to get multiple tables and join them into something known as a data model, where you get to use a set of expressions known as DAX expressions to relate the columns together and build custom columns that you can eventually then use within a pivot table report. Don't forget, if you are interested in asking any of us instructors questions or joining our office hours, be sure to check out the link below for Offsite. I do want to thank you all for attending this session. This course was provided to you by Learnit. Be sure to check out our website if you're interested in other trainings. And that was Excel 2021 Pivot Tables, everyone. Thank you all, and I hope to see you in a future course or in an off-site office hours. Until next time, everyone, take care.